I think I speak for a lot of Sacramento Kings fans when I say what I need from this organization this offseason is something to be excited about or hopeful about again. Kenny Caraway from ESPN 1320 joins me to discuss that, plus realistic best case scenarios for next season. It's all right here on Locked On Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all off season long. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. And initially, my plan was to have Kenny Caraway on this podcast, KC from D-Lo and KC, to discuss and tap into kind of his optimistic side and discuss best case scenarios for next season and what we could see as the how next season goes right. And as the conversation went on, I realized what I want and what I think a lot of Kings fans are looking for this summer or lacking with this team right now is something to just be excited about, optimistic about, hopeful about, right? The direction of this team, their ability to develop into a legitimate contender, a young player that could turn into a future star, right? This roster just doesn't have any of that right now. This organization has lost that spark or that momentum from 2 years ago with Beam Team 1. So what can the organization do this offseason? What can Scott Perry and Doug Christie do to bring that excitement, that optimism, that hope, something back to this fan base, even if next season's team looks very similar to this season's team, or there's only some slight changes, not a complete roster overhaul? You're going to hear, as Kenny and I talk and go back and forth over the course of this podcast, you'll hear the conversation shift from the best case scenarios for next season kind of to what I just laid out there and the state of this organization and finding something to be optimistic or excited about again. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with the KC and D-Lo and KC on ESPN 1320. It's Kenny Caraway. For years in the Sacramento media landscape, at least when it came to the Kings, I was known as the blind optimist, or I was the optimistic first guy when it came to talking about the Sacramento Kings. Well, I think that mantle has been passed to my man who joins me now on the Locked On Kings podcast, KC, the KC and D-Lo and KC on ESPN 1320. Kenny Caraway joining me. KC, as the optimist man, I need you to fire me up. I need to fire these Kings fans up for this upcoming summer and upcoming season next fall. I know there's a lot of context that we don't have between May 1st today and start of training camp. A lot of things could change. This roster could look completely different, but we do have an understanding via some reports that the Kings are not interested in any kind of full-on like tear down rebuild, right? They're still trying to compete, which makes perfect sense based off their situation. So what I'm looking for from you, my guys, let's go back and forth about what we feel some realistic best case scenarios are for the Kings next season, specifically in terms of how they compete. Like we went into last season with 50 wins in our head, right? You and I were both on the same wavelength. They're like, can this team get to 50? Do we feel like that conversation should be completely put to bed, but still there could be a positive win to what could it be matching their 46 wins from 2 years ago? Is that too much to ask for? Like, what do you think is a realistic best case scenario for this team to compete as early as next season?
Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me Locked On, man. Come on, man. Locked On has been killing it all year long, man. And to be on this platform, to be on your show, man, I appreciate you first and foremost. So there's that. Second of all, So I'm gonna get to your question.
Yeah.
But me as an optimist, maybe I think it gets misconstrued a little bit as far as optimism, as I'm not 100% pessimistic, right? So I'm not here telling you the Kings are great. I'm not telling you they're in a great place. I'm not here saying that they're about to, take off and the best things that can happen are going to happen. What I say is, number one, there's more to the downfall of the Sacramento Kings than Vivek Ranadive. He plays a major role. He is the head of the table. So part of the job is he's got to wear all of this. If people don't believe in the franchise, he's got to wear that. But my biggest thing has always been, and maybe we'll get into it a little bit later, is true accountability throughout this organization. I've always felt like people have always, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, known that they've had an out as to why they can't get their job done. And that out is, well, people will just say it's Vivek's fault. And if I'm not handling my business in the front office, if I'm not handling my business as a coach, if I'm not handling my business as a player, I always have that crutch to lean on. And people are going to believe it because it's Vivek Ranadive.
Sure.
And I think they've taken that approach too far, to the point where there isn't true accountability. I know people talk about accountability, but true accountability is something that, it kind of gets masked a little bit in like, oh, well, I said it's my fault, but this guy didn't do his job. No, let's focus on me. I didn't do my job. I need to, and that's true accountability. So I always feel like that's a little bit of a crutch, but because I bring that up, I'm looked at as a Vivek apologist and all this other stuff, and that's fine. Vivek has a lot of faults of his own and a lot of things that he does that I don't agree with, and that's that. But that's whatever. So the optimistic thing is maybe I just don't think like everything is guaranteed to be bad. That's just kind of where I come from. Next season.
Let me jump on that really quick before we transition to the next season, because the reality is the conversation has to kind of stop at some point. Like Vivek is here. That's not going to change. Like ownership is not going to change. And the one thing that I'll always stand in front of Vivek and ownership about is there's always the intention of winning. You'll never see him trying to play the cheap route. You'll really rarely ever see him unwilling to reach into his pockets to pay. Even if he's paying the wrong players, he's still trying to pay the players and ultimately trying to succeed. So where the conversation stops and where I agree with you, Casey, is yes, Vivek wears a lot of the responsibility for a lot of this, especially repeating patterns. That's probably the biggest issue that I have in his ownership tenure. But where the conversation stops is, okay, even if there's skepticism of, is Scott Perry making the decisions or not? Scott Perry's here now, right? Whether Doug Christie was the Vivek's coaching decision or not, Doug Christie has now been committed to as the head coach. Okay, so now the attention pivots to them, right? So that's kind of where this transitioning to our conversation, that's where like the optimism for next season comes into play, because while Vivek will always play a part of it because he's an owner and owners always play some sort of role, it's now Perry and Doug that need to come to the table and figure out the direction of this organization, short-term, long-term, whatever, and find define what success is for next season and then go out and accomplish it. Right. So I think that transitions us into the conversation that we're going to have today of what do we think like a realistic successful season looks like for this team where they're at under Perry and Doug and their responsibility specifically.
If everything goes right next season, and once again, you mentioned it before, there's moves that have to be made, but we'll do this exercise with the roster that they have right now. If everything goes right, you could see them having a 5th or 6th seed in the West. That is like the ceiling. That is, everybody stayed healthy. Everybody was on the same page, had a career year. Everything goes wrong, it's probably around the same place that it's in this year, like a 9-10 seed. And, you're fighting in the play-in and you got to win 2 games in the play-in. I think when you look back on this year, everything that went wrong, went wrong. And that's where they landed. You had coach firings, you had player injuries, you had players dealing with personal issues, and this is where they landed, in the bottom. So I don't really see them being any lower than that, worst case scenario. Where they'll probably be with how they're constructed right now somewhere between 7 and 9, back into play-in and trying to scratch and claw their way into a playoff performance again. That's probably where they would be, somewhere in the middle of the ceiling and the floor. I think they have talented players on there. I think Domantas Sabonis is obviously one of the most talented big men in the game. I think Zach LaVine is one of the more talented players in the game. DeMar DeRozan, if he's still here, which I doubt, he's still a certified, verified bucket. You look at the playoffs, you look at a team like Houston, who, as great as they are on the defensive end, this is what they struggle with. They struggle with being able to rely on somebody to get 25 points a night, and be able to bring to the table their 22 points every single night. They don't have anybody they can rely on that with. And that's valuable in this league. And I think if this team was able to get to a postseason series, that's where you would see the benefit of somebody like DeMar DeRozan. So there's still talent on here. Malik Monk, Keegan Murray. I love Keon Ellis, all those guys. Devin Carter, he showed some signs towards the end of last season when he started to get his feet under him in his rookie season. So they've got some good ball players. They've got some good guys. You've got to find the right combination of guys that fit as a group, as a cohesive group. And that's going to be the task of Scott Perry and Doug Christie in this offseason.
You said almost everything that could go wrong did go wrong this season. For the most part, I think I agree with you. I'm curious, and I haven't really thought about it too much, but I'll throw it at you. Are there any teams that finish below Sacramento that not even like the Mavericks in 10, more the teams that didn't make it, like the Portlands and Utahs and teams like that? Are there any teams below the Kings in the West that concern you about potentially leapfrogging Sacramento if they were essentially going to not completely run this back? Because I think we're going to get some sort of changes, but for the most part, the way this roster is more than likely going to carry over short term into next season.
Yeah, I mean, the three that come to my mind, 3 of the 5 actually, would be San Antonio, Portland, and I think New Orleans could have a quick turnaround as well. When you talk about everything going wrong in one season, that's what they dealt with this past season. That's not a 17-win team or whatever they have based on the talent and the assets that they have. So I could see them turning things around. I could see Phoenix turning things around. I didn't include them initially, but I mean, you've got a Devin Booker, whatever you can get back in the Kevin Durant trade. Maybe you can turn some things around. The only team that I think is completely hopeless in the West is the Utah Jazz. So because of the conference that they're in, there's always teams that could leapfrog, teams that are in the playoffs right now, so you've got to be aware of that. I think the Kings are in that group, though, of talented teams like a Portland, like a New Orleans, who, if you get a good health and you're able to, get good seasons out of a lot of your good players, you can find yourself in the play-in relatively easily. So I think the Kings are in that group. They're in that group, not in the Utah group.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Especially now at the beginning of the month when those mortgage payments and everything are due, and between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. Poof, it's all gone very quickly. Well, that's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, your investments, and your spending all in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start actually building wealth. You'll get some incredible insights with Monarch Money, specifically breaking down where your money is going, how much money you're spending at your favorite coffee shop every single month, or on groceries specifically, or on streaming services, entertainment, whatever. It's all in one place. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, even plan your long-term goals. And collaboration is easy with Monarch Money. Managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and ultimately stay on the same page without any of that added stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. monarchmoney.com. Locked On NBA is the code for half off of your first year. So this is really where I need your help, because to me, the idea of another season of just kind of being mid, treading water, being around a 500 team like the Kings were, doesn't sound appealing to me, not just from a consumer standpoint, because riding that wave was the highs and lows were nauseating at times this season. It's less about that. It's more about like, where are you going? What are you doing? And it's hard for me to convince myself that that's not just a wasted year. But I also understand Scott Perry is inheriting this. And this is an NBA 2K where you can go into the trade machine and just make a bunch of deals all of a sudden and completely change your franchise overnight, right? So Scott Perry has to maybe ride some of these contracts out, wait till the trade deadline to move some pieces that aren't really movable right now. Get more context on certain pieces on this roster, get a draft pick for next summer, right? So there's all these situations that in reality he has to deal with that have to play out over the next year. So I guess I'm not asking you to sell me on anything, KC, but when you think about what this season will likely be, this upcoming season will likely be, what about it attracts you, or what about it makes you think, okay, this isn't just a treading water, wasting time year? What's the value in next season for this franchise?
Well, for me, there's probably not going to be that much new as far as a player that you can build upon, right? You got Zach LaVine here. You got Domantas Sabonis here. Keegan Murray's going to be here. In a DeMar DeRozan potential trade, I don't think you're getting Reed Shepherd or something like that. Somebody that's like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to be here for the next 10 years and he's amazing and he's young. Like, I don't think that guy is going to return. So that's what you laid out is pretty much what it is. You're going to have a lot of this core back. If you get something back in a DeMar DeRozan trade or even a potential Malik Monk trade, it's probably going to be somebody just throwing out like a random player, like a Gary Trent Jr., right? Like this role player who's good, who can help you win games, but he's not the cornerstone. So that's what Scott Perry has at his table, at his in front of him right now. When you look for something towards the future, you're looking towards having a draft pick in the following season, being 1 year closer to the end of a Zach LaVine contract, or making a Domantas Sabonis contract more palatable for somebody who you might want to deal with. And that's where you're looking at maybe your future cornerstone piece. But next year, yeah, to a certain degree is treading water. But I mean, I don't know. I want to win a championship like everybody else, and I want to make steps towards winning a championship like everybody else. But if you find a way, whether it's through the 5th or 6th seed or winning a play-in game or two, to get into the playoffs, have a playoff series here, maybe win some games, maybe win a series, depending on the matchup. I'm okay with that treading water for 1 year. That's okay. Like that's fine with me, as opposed to just being Utah for a year or two. Like that's unappealing.
Is it as simple as like, we are who we are for next season? This is just we're probably not competing for a title, but we're not bad. We're not a bad team. We are a competitive team in the West, for whatever that means. Just go for it and try and be the best that we can for a year. Is that as basically as simple as you can put it for what this organization's short-term goal should be? Is just, this is who we are for now. Just go out there, run it out there, and see how good it can be for one season, and don't really worry about years 2, 3, and 4.
I mean, I think that probably is the case, to be real about it. And a lot of people will attribute that to not having a draft pick and the Zach LaVine contract. And those are two aspects of it. But to me, it's also the Domantas Sabonis contract. Domantas Sabonis is a really good basketball player, just like I look at Zach LaVine and I think he's a really good basketball player. But these guys aren't ones or twos or guys that you build your franchise around. And with that, if you want to move on from them, they have contracts where people are looking at it the same way. Like, yeah, Zach LaVine is a good ball player, but I don't want to pay him $44 million. Domantas Sabonis is a good ball player, but I don't want to pay him $43, $46, and $49 million over the next 3 years. So just like people look at Zach LaVine as a reason as to why they're stuck, I think that same logic can be used for Domantas Sabonis, because to be able to get a young player or get draft picks or draft assets, you got to have an asset that you can trade that can net that type of return. And I'm not sure either one of those guys can net that type of return. So I don't like to look at it this way, but for a lack of a better term, you're stuck with them at least for 1 year.
Mm-hmm. So that's where I need, whether it's something from the organization or something within myself, and I think a lot of fans might feel the same way, and maybe you even feel the same way, Casey. I need to find something for next season to be excited about, because the concept of competing for a bottom seed playoff to play in spot only to likely lose in the first round, or maybe you just need to be excited about, or we just need to be excited about, hey, the possibility of just another playoff series in Sacramento, regardless of the context, the seed and the opponent, just another playoff series in Sacramento, so another drought doesn't start. Because what I'm getting at, or what I feel when analyzing this team and the position that they're at, is I don't know where they're going. I don't know what about this roster, other than certain individuals like a Keon Ellis or Keegan Murray, and maybe those are the guys that I'm leaning on. I'm struggling to find something with the state of the Kings that I can be excited about or hopeful about going forward. And that's where I don't know if Scott Perry can solve that problem this summer, because I think you and I both agreed DeMar DeRozan will probably be gone, or should be gone. One, it opens up cap space for the Kings. Two, I don't think DeMar will want to be here. It makes no sense for him. And three, it just doesn't fit, I think, for the Kings. Not that that's DeMar's fault. He is who he is. The Kings are going in the direction they're going. It just doesn't work. But also, you and I both know damn well that the Kings are not trading DeMar DeRozan and getting a better player, right? Mm-hmm. They're getting a role player, maybe a draft pick that's super, super heavily protected, or not even a valuable draft pick at all. Like, they're just not getting much of value for DeMar DeRozan at this point. So it's a long-winded way of me saying, KC, I just don't know, and I need to find something with this organization, this roster, the state of this team for next season, just next season, to be excited or about or encouraged by, because I don't have that right now with this organization.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, and once again, regardless of the thought of me being optimistic or whatever, I'm probably one of the more competitive people you'll ever come across. So I want to win a championship as a fan, obviously.
Sure.
But yeah, I want to win a championship. That's always the goal. That's what you're striving for, and that's what you're trying to do. But I will say this to all my people here in Sacramento and people who have been lifelong Kings fans and have had to deal with failure after failure after failure. Who are we to say, I don't want a playoff series? Excuse me? Excuse me? We were begging while DeMarcus Cousins was here to get an 8th seed playoff series. We were going crazy in 1996 when a Mitch Richmond team that had no future, let's just be honest with you, that team wasn't going anywhere, but they got into the playoffs. And, you know, we talk about, you know, how excited the city was and what they did at game 3, where people were there 30 minutes before, standing up, all this other stuff. Like, that's who we are. That's what we do. And it's not that we accept just being a mediocre team, but at the same time, if that's what this team is bringing to the table, and if that's what this team is being able to give us with the best of their abilities, we appreciate that and we support that. And that's what we do here in the city. So that's that. When you talk about what you might have to look forward to next year, there's one team that fits kind of the blueprint of maybe what Scott Perry and Doug Christie want to have with this team. And everybody wants a young, exciting team with, a 23-year-old, and we're in the playoffs and we got all this promise for 10 years. But sometimes it's not like that, right? But look at the Los Angeles Clippers. That's a team that has Kawhi Leonard, who's obviously awesome. You got James Harden, who's a Hall of Famer, but he's at the end of his career, and you know he's on the tail end of his career. That doesn't mean he's not productive. But this is just a group of guys that are well coached, have a certain mentality to how they approach the game from the top down, work hard, work together, and they're a team that are a fringe championship contender in the West. I believe. Now we'll see what happens. They may be out in the first round, but like they don't have any young budding star, no 22-year-old to be like, oh, we're going to build around him. No, they just they got a bunch of guys that go about the game, playing it the right way, competing, working together, and really finding a way to be successful every time they step out there on the floor. So that who's to say the Kings can't be that with the right leadership, with the right moves here and there. And that could be what they are next year.
Casey, you don't have to go far in the history of this podcast to hear me say almost exactly what you said in terms of like, we'll take a playoff series regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the situation. And the reality is the context of making it that year in 2023, and then everything that has transpired over the 2 years since then has definitely changed those expectations or changed that viewpoint, at least for me. And I think for a lot of Sacramento Kings fans, not that a taste of the playoffs is enough to demand being a playoff team every single year and competing for a championship right away. But I think we thought the organization was on the upward trajectory, and the downfall has been rapid, and it's been more of a plummet than anything else, which has been difficult. I'll speak for myself. It's been difficult for me to kind of work my way through, considering where I felt this organization was at. And maybe I was wrong. Maybe I overestimated, like maybe a lot of us overestimated that Beam team that first year. But even the vibes are completely different from what they were that 1 year. I have a hard time beyond like the introductions of Game 3 and Game 4 and the pyro and the excitement outside of the Golden One Center before the game. I have a hard time seeing if there would have been any value at all to the Kings being the 8th seed this year. Like people say, Keegan Murray would have gotten experience. Keon Ellis would have gotten experience. Losing to OKC by 30 or 40 points every single game, I don't think is valuable experience for anybody, regardless if it's a playoff game or not. So what I need to, I guess if this team is going to be a playoff team or compete for a playoff spot next year, I just want to have a better feeling under Doug Christie, under Scott Perry. This is where I look at them specifically, not ownership. Under them specifically, how do you get this team to not only get to the playoffs, but be able to compete in the playoffs against likely a top seed? How can the Kings not necessarily win the series like the Timberwolves just did, but how can the Kings be the low-seeded T-Wolves and give a higher seed like the Lakers hell? Like, that's where I need to see this roster get to that point before I'll get excited about a playoff series again, I guess, with this group.
Well, I'll tell you like this, and the playoffs and the regular season are different, but you're talking about a Kings team that beat Cleveland twice, that showed a lot of the times that when they went up against some of the top competition, they were able to not only compete, but win those games. Going to Boston, win that. Obviously, De'Aaron Fox was still, well, he was on the roster. He didn't play in that game. But,
correct,
you know, having those type of performances shows you what they are capable of. And once again, the big elephant in the room is, I think at the very least, one of those components won't be here in DeMar DeRozan, and you don't know what you're getting in return. Sure. But even with that one, you know, DeMar DeRozan, as much as I defended him and think he's a good basketball player and did his job while he was here, maybe that is a situation where if he's not here, you get somebody that fits a little better with what's going on. Zach LaVine can play better. Domantas Sabonis can play a little better. And maybe the person that you bring in fits what you're trying to do better than what you had when you had DeMar DeRozan here. So I think if they were able to get to the playoffs next year, I don't think they would be a Memphis type situation. And a lot of people look at even the Memphis situation where they got swept, right? And I think because they lost game one, the way they lost game one, it jaded everybody to what that series was. That series, the games were close. Two of them, Memphis is probably like, we should have won. Game 2 in OKC, I think at one point it got down to 10 or whatever, but you're on the road against the number 1 seed. You're probably not going to have these barn burners, but you had 2 games at home where they probably believe they should have won. They lost their best player in the process. So put yourself in that situation in Sacramento where next year you're going up against an OKC, and in game 3 or 4, you don't lose your best player. You hold on to a 17-point lead. And somehow, some way, this is a 2-2 series going back to Oklahoma City. Like that is plausible if you get into the playoffs. And one of the things about getting into the playoffs that I think helps Scott Perry and Doug Christie with their job moving forward is you want to be able to go to agents, go to players, and say, look, this is a playoff team of what we had. We need you to take us further. We're not Charlotte. We're not Washington. Like that's where if you miss the playoffs or if you bottom out and Scott Perry is going to player X and saying, hey man, I want to get you over here. Let's work a deal over here. You guys are 5 years away from being competent. I'm not bringing my client there. Sure. Whereas if you're the 7-8 seed and you've got a guy that is, a borderline guy, or I'm not saying this guy, but DeMar DeRozan type, you say, look, man, we're 7th, 8th seed. We need you to get us into that 3-4 seed. And you could take and say, I like what you guys are building over there, Scott. Like, let's do this. That's the benefit, in my opinion, or one of the benefits to making a playoff run next year, or being a team that's a 7-8 seed or something like that and can get into a playoff series. So if you have a savvy enough front office and a coach as well, you can use that quote unquote treading water season to your advantage and use that as a pitch moving forward to try and improve your team for the years beyond.
Let me ask you this, KC, to wrap up, kind of pivoting to Scott Perry. The trust is being put on Scott Perry to take the reins of this organization and get them back into, or even to a better place than Monte McNair ever got them to. One of the things that I'm nervous about, not because I don't trust Perry or I'm worried about ownership, I'm just nervous about it because it could make or break the future of this organization, is assuming the Kings don't get stupid lucky in the lottery this year, they will lose their pick to Atlanta. But then all their picks going forward are freed up. Not to mention some of the firsts. They're not the best firsts, or some of them we don't know how good they're going to be that they got in the De'Aaron Fox deal. But they have, for lack of a better term, a treasure trove of assets. Not at the level of like a Sam Presti in OKC, but they have their first-round picks freed up. There is your opportunity to really try and make a splash for Scott Perry. Now, what makes me nervous, and this is where the Vivek thing kind of comes in, is he being encouraged to gamble with those assets long term in order to try and accomplish something short term that realistically has a low chance of success. But how do you feel about, because I think you've talked about this on D'Lo and KC before, like, how do you feel about holding on to or managing those assets that are then freed up to put yourself long term in a good position as an organization versus using those assets to actually try and get talent to win basketball games? Because that door is going to be open to Perry, and that's where we have to trust him to. If you're going to use that treasure trove, you better operate like you're going to be around to feel the ramifications of that, not make a bunch of deals that in 3 years you're never going to have to deal with because you'll be long gone.
I look at it where you use those assets when the time is right. And I don't think any of us know, and Scott Perry doesn't even know. And I'm not saying that because there's no direction, but you don't know when the time is right. You'll know when you know. The time could be right this summer. Whereas, and this is pie in the sky, I'm not saying this is real, but if you got all 5 of your first round picks, and they went Domantas Sabonis and 5 first-round picks for Giannis Antetokounmpo. Well, the time is now to use those picks.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like that's the time. But if they're saying, hey, you can get I'm just throwing out a random, once again, I'll just use his name. You can get a DeMar DeRozan type for 3 first-round picks. The time isn't now.
What about like a Trae Young?
Following year.
What about like a Trae Young or a Zion? Like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, those guys are intriguing, and those are the things you've got to sit down with your coach and feel like those guys, what can they do for your franchise, not only now, but moving forward? You got a guy like Zion, where if you're willing to take a chance on him and think about the pluses. Was it something going on in New Orleans health-wise? We've heard Zion come out and say, I play back-to-back every time if I could. They won't let me. You know what I mean? I'm willing to go out there and try and play. I'm as healthy as I felt now. I don't know how long, but they're treating me with kid gloves. So if you believe that, if you go into the medicals, if you talk to his representation and you believe that's the case, yeah, give up 3 or 4 first-round picks for a Zion Williamson, because when he plays, this guy is one of the best players in the league. And in a place like Sacramento, when's your next opportunity to get a guy like Zion Williamson? So it's one of those things, and I feel the same way about Trae Young. I like Trae Young a lot more than a lot of people do. I understand his shortcomings. He's not a great defender. He's small. You've got to put certain players around him, but I think he is super underrated as a point guard and a top flight player in this league.
He'd be fun.
So I'd be interested in that, but that's where Scott Perry gets with Doug Christie, and to a certain degree gets with Vivek Ranadive, and whatever Scott Perry believes in, being able to convince Vivek one way or another, like this is the move to make, whether it's stand pat whether it's this isn't the time right now, or it's let's go make this move. It's his job, and this was the failure. I wouldn't even say failure, because I feel like for all the talk of meddling and Vivek running things, from all accounts, there was a lot of times when Vivek wanted to do something and Monty said, no, this isn't the time to do it. And that's the way that everybody went, Monty's way. So I don't even know if it's necessarily convinced. Maybe it's more so of a hold off of Vivek Ranadive, but that's Scott Perry's job to sit up here, evaluate when the time is right, and then strike, or in certain cases not strike, and hold those cards a little bit longer. So it's a long-winded way of saying, I don't think anybody knows until you're faced with the possibility of having to make that move or not.
That's a saying you like to say too. Today's price is not yesterday's price. So things can change very, very quickly too in the NBA. We know that. Well, Casey, let's revisit this conversation in September then. Like once we got the context of this offseason, see where this team is at, and then we can talk about excitement for next season and like realistic expectations for best case scenario for next season. Right now, we got a whole summer for Scott Perry to figure some things out. I don't think things are going to look a lot different. I think the takeaway from this conversation is I need the Kings to get me something to get excited about again. I don't feel any excitement towards where this team is at right now, but that doesn't mean Scott Perry can't change that in one summer, especially for us diehards here in Sacramento. It doesn't take much to get this fan base back on the bandwagon a little back fired up. So Casey, we'll revisit this conversation again. Thank you for making the time, my guy, right before you hop on with D-Lo and or for your show, D-Lo and Casey. So I appreciate you, and we'll do it again soon.
All love, my guy. Anytime, big dog.